Well, hello, creatives, community, kind folks, and those with hit points. Welcome to RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and just being a little sarcastic this morning, and thought, you know what? Let's talk about something that absolutely nobody has an opinion about in our tabletop community, tabletop role-playing game community, and I thought we would talk about uh, hit points. Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about hit points, and as you can see below, are hit points a relic of fantasy tabletop RPGs? And we may talk a little bit about the history of hit points, but also contextually, what do they represent? We're going to go into, do they even matter anymore? Is this something? A lot of times we even come up with this idea of, like, we know that Dungeons and Dragons, in any of its iterations, is the most popular role playing game worldwide in many ways. Should it be the introductory game? There are a lot of, like, I'm going to call them pocket games or one page games that might have a better descriptor or whatnot. And then, are we all on the same page as far as hit points? Now, of course, we can get into other arguments like alignment and armor class and some of these other things, but this is, we can discuss whether we think it should remain, whether we should get rid of it, whether it is um, it is a, despite its old bones, it should remain anyway, out of tradition. Um, in some ways, you can make the argument that maybe hit points are the kind of thing that should remain, if for no other reason than to convince some people to play it and then move on from it to discover maybe other role playing games, so on and so forth. So we'll get into all that. But I thought we would try to get on the same page as far as our description of hit points and what the interwebs consider to be hit points, and maybe some of the fault. I've said this many times on the show. Maybe some of the faults we see, like the arguments we have with alignment and armor class and such, maybe some of that is our fault, and not necessarily the fault of the description, but the fault of us creating tension, destroying the immersion of it because we don't understand what it really represents. All right, so let's get into TV tropes, okay? So, because that's a very popular place we like to drop into, and I got there first before you, there, Tesla Ranger. Sorry about that, but and TV tropes.org tends to have some pretty sarcastic and funny descriptions of things in terms of tropes, maybe away from role playing games. So, for hit points, it says in most video games centered around combat, because video games are very popular, hit points are a measure of how close to death or incapacitation a character is. Of course, rather than bothering to simulate realistic injuries, players get a number or life meter attributed to their character to indicate their current condition. It's like a time irrelevant take on exact time to failure, in that only losing the last one causes any real harm. Some games, especially tabletop RPGs, may hand wave it as an abstraction of non-video game tropes such as plot armor and heroic resolve, or actual health versus injury. As a character's hit points or HP drops is ostensibly their talent or luck at dodging, deflecting, and absorbing the worst blows, dropping as they get more tired and desperate until they actually get hurt badly enough to be out of combat. In Wikipedia, they say hit points, health or hit points, commonly abbreviated as HP, is an attribute in tabletop role-playing games and video games that determines the maximum amount of damage the character object can take. If the amount of health is fully depleted, the character dies or loses consciousness. Such a character can be the player character, a mob, or a boss. Health can be attributed to destructive elements of the game environment or inanimate objects such as vehicles and their individual parts, which that's going to be a sub part of what we're going to talk about as well. about inanimate objects in the environment, and I will dare say problem solving. Okay, so anyway, in video games, health is often represented by visual elements such as a numerical fraction, a health bar, or a series of small icons, though it may also be represented acoustically, um, such as through a character's heartbeat, which we see that plenty of times in some a lot of like first person shooter games and such. And a lot of times you'll see like the health bars at 100, meaning like 100% and such. Of course, they go into the history of hit points. And lastly, I know I'm reading a lot. Lastly, hit points. This is from the basic rules of the most Dungeons and Dragons. Hit points. Hit points represent a combination. Mind you, remember that combination of physical and mental durability, the will to live, and luck. Creatures with more hit points are more difficult to kill. Those with fewer hit points are more fragile, which I think is not a very good wording considering when you go on. A character's current hit points, usually just called hit points, can be any number from the creature's hit point maximum down to 0. This number changes frequently as a character takes damage or receives healing. Whenever a creature takes damage, that damage is subtracted from its hit points. The loss of hit points has no effect on the creature's capabilities until the creature drops to 0 hit points. Now, a lot of the wording that they said in this deals with like physical harm. They do mention mental durability and has no effect on the creature's capabilities until the creature drops to 0. But just above that, it says injury and death are risk constant companions, those who explore the world, thrust of a sword, well-placed arrow, blast of flame, or fireball all have the potential to damage or even kill the hardiest creatures. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, I get it. Sounds like it's all pure, like, harm and damage. But they also talk about mental durability, the will to live, and luck. And that's in the very first line. And so I think part of the problem with us talking about hit points is the fact that a lot of times we just assume, like, okay, well, hit points represent me getting hit. Oh, that's another sword slash. That's another arrow to the chest. That's another. When there is, in their own description, they talk about mental durability, the luck, and the will to live, and yet we still tend to talk about things causing physical harm. And a lot of times, like, my wizard with 60 hit points and my warrior with 80 hit points is taking the same damage. It's like, no, that may not be the case. And I think sometimes we are not embracing the idea, because of the semantics of the nature of hit points, that it's not you actually getting hit, but it is it's a countdown to Armageddon. So there are other game systems that use different types of mechanics or mechanisms to represent hit points. The first thing is that a lot of games through context just use a different word. I've seen health, doom, stress. I mean, there's a million other mechanisms. Exhaustion, fatigue, stun versus wounds, and all kinds of stuff. And anybody that's played Dungeons and Dragons for any amount of time has already come up with their own version of how to make hit points a little bit more realistic. I don't know if that's the correct word. Gritty. To make hit points feel more emblematic of what's really going on in the game. And I think I think Dungeons and Dragons does itself a disservice by not embracing the cinematic nature and descriptive nature of what hit points to me represents, and that the physical harm might only be a smaller percentage. It's not a 100%, but there's a smaller percentage where there's more mental durability, willpower, luck involved in it, rather than the physical nature of physically being injured and resisting that injury. Like standing in the blast of a fireball, and it's like, well, if I just sleep, I won't have third-degree burns or something. Uh, Thank you there. Mufa says Fantasy Flight games Star Wars or Genesis uses wounds and strain. Wounds are physical, strain is the other types of damage, like exhaustion, stun, mental and emotional damage. And as well, Dungeons and Dragons actually has hit point damage from like psychic attacks, and you can actually take this. It's a weird way to describe it, and I think the semantics of using the word hit and points, but you can also take damage from psychological harm as well. I bring what's the very low level ability where you take psychic damage because of someone talking to you. but that's a possibility too. Movacall says some would explain hit points not as the character taking large hits and damage, but instead losing their ability to defend themselves and being tired. You take 20 damage, you have 10 left. Instead of that character being a one-limbed mess trying to fight, the character's still in fighting condition, but they are nearing the point where they can no longer avoid a death blow. Vicious mockery. Thank you there. Sorry, being live a lot of times I get the little mental farts going on. I was like, vicious mockery. It's right there on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't remember it. So thank you there. Uh, Tina's Dungeon. I'm going to pronounce it Tina's Dungeon because it sounds a little dirty, if you don't mind. But yes, oh, okay, here we go. We got it. You guys dropped in a ton of variations on it. Tesla Ranger says, I mean, going off of the wounds and strain, Tesla Ranger says, I like the vitality wound point system from D20 Star Wars. Tired Needs Sleep says, you get swiped by a halberd, take 10 damage, right? And like Movacall saying that if we looked at hit points more as a countdown to Armageddon, like a Doom counter, or a rephrasing, and I think it's just contextualizing it, right? I mean, when you use the term hit and point, you're assuming you're being hit, and much like a warrior putting up a shield and being bashed on the shield over and over again, it, we can and really by the rules describe it as like um, uh, mental exhaustion, being skilled, but the skill in defending themselves is starting to wear off. Maybe someone is so fast or can deflect or parry a blow enough times that at a certain point the enemy will realize how to break through their defenses. But we also have a stat called armor class, and it's just kind of this dichotomy, right? Like, well, if I have an armor class and they get past my armor, which is not technically armor, then they're hitting me, right? It's like, well, that's not exactly what that is, but they're trying to do it. Mofacall says there's nothing funnier than taking down a 200 plus hit point creature with a vicious mockery because they aren't resistant from psychic damage. Yeah, you just start you start chipping away at their self esteem. The Tarrasque is like, oh, I'm so sorry. Anyway, uh, Tired Needs Sleep goes on to say, really? I keep my limbs, my head, after being hit by a halberd for 10 damage? Yep, absolutely, because that's how the rules work. As described by the rules, it's not all physical damage. It's not all being slashed and punched and pierced and things like that. Cameron says the Harry Potter RPG uses a wound system with 3 different tiers of wounds. Yeah. Yeah. You have 500 hit points. You lose a finger at best, or a fingernail. Yeah. Well, and let's be honest. You might not lose anything. It might be the cinematic version of the hero slow motion jumping away from the explosion and just getting pelted by little bits of debris, knowing that they escaped something through the skin of their teeth to then continue on until they're taken out, right? And it's weird for us to talk about it because the very term hit points sounds like something, but technically that's not what it is, right? Um, Tina's Dungeon says hit points I describe as health pool, so it covers the physical, emotional, and psychological health, right? And this is where I think hit points might be our fault rather than the game's fault in how we use them. And I think, much like we say armor class, you're either hit or you're missed. Well, armor class technically isn't the same thing either, right? And I'm not trying to get a little squirrely here, but with armor class, it's a combination of A, your armor, but B, your speed and ability to deflect things, right? So maybe you did get hit by that sword, you just parried it very well, or maybe you did get hit. And so hit points are the opposite. Maybe you weren't caught in the blast of the fireball, you ducked under the table or something, or maybe you really didn't fall 500 feet and fall flat on your back. Maybe you did a Rambo and fell through some trees, or bits of your cape or clothing or something got caught on an outcrop, or maybe you were mounted or something. It's possible that, not possible, but probable within the context of their own description, that this is the blow that should have taken you out, but it didn't. And all we're doing is counting down to the point at which a single attack takes you out. And we've seen this in a lot of our media, right? The main hero, despite being, as a matter of fact, even when our main hero is injured, they're not really injured, right? How many times have we seen a character pierce through their side with an arrow, a bullet goes through their hand, they claim to have like dislocated their shoulder, but it's not really dislocated because they keep on fighting, right? And could you really punch someone in the face with a bullet through your hand? No, right? It's basically plot armor. Yep, yeah. Matteo D. Domenico says, Matteo says, hit points are plot armor. Yep, they are plot armor. No, you don't have to apologize for that. I got it. Yep. Tired Need Sleep is like Sylvester Stallone slowly running away from an explosion montage. Hell yeah. And I think if we embrace that part of it, because I get it, hit points bother us a lot, right? We look for role-playing games where we want a wound track, or we want there are many games that use words in a mechanical effect to describe how our character is injured, right? Where it's like, I'm bruised, I'm wounded, I'm bleeding, I'm unconscious, I'm confused. And you'll see these wound tracks. White Wolf games use this plenty of times, from the first into the second editions of the game, where it's like, oh, well, you might have 3 levels where nothing really happens to you, and then as you start moving down, you're like -1, -2, -3, and then each track has a descriptor attached to it, so you at least have a word describing how your character's moving. And we're going to talk about the death spiral in a minute. Yeah, Cam, you're so right. Ain't that a trope? Yeah, cool guys don't look at explosions, right? You always have to turn your back to them and walk away or run away slowly, which is kind of disappointing, because if you're like, man, I'd love to be in an action movie, you'll never ever get to see the explosions because you're never looking at them if you're the main character. Um, um, Tina's Dungeon says, how accurate does something have to be in order to cause an effect? I don't know. Hit points describe as health pools, so it covers physical, emotional. I don't know. It depends on the game, right? Like, Dungeons and Dragons hit point system isn't very accurate. Now, there are games where you roll for where you're injured, whether it's your knee or the back of your hand, or you got struck in your kidney or the back of the head or something. Like, I mean, I even have dice where you roll the dice and see where you're in, where you roll for damage, and you can roll to see where the injury struck you. Of course, then you get funny things like, I try to punch him in the face. You punched him in the kneecap instead, right? So there's a little bit of funny parts of that as well. Um, you're so right. Tired, need sleep. Arnold Schwarzenegger used to eat explosions for lunch. He sure did. He's probably one of the few people that has the back of his head has probably felt more explosions than a little bit. Movacall says every battle against a dragon would be a survivor death blow for a level 1 character. At level 15, character's body would not be that much stronger. Their body's not what changes, but the level 15 character manages to use skill to avoid it being a death blow. And I gotta agree with Mateo as well. Despite the fact that a lot of times we don't like plot armor, hit points are probably plot armor. How many times have we seen a non-combatant, non-skilled individual in a movie or television show? I'm looking at you, scientist, surrounded by nameless but supposed to be professional guards dressed in body armor and machine guns, or armored knights or something, and they all get slaughtered except for the person ducking behind the table who has no combat skills, right? Well, maybe the description of that is all the guards have 7 hit points and the person ducking has 23, and they just took 7 hit points, right? I know that sounds like a very strange mathematical description of a named character ducking away from combat, while the more skilled individuals get mowed down very easily, pierced through the throat or something. But if we look at hit points as plot armor, or each of us uses descriptions to describe what our hit points are doing, like minions, like minions, right? Maybe if each of us, for example, let's take all the classic character classes: fighter, paladin, rogue, monk, whatever, and they each have 20 hit points or 50 hit points or something. Maybe each of them loses hit points in a way unique to themselves. Like, maybe the wizard is surrounded by a magical field of energy, right? It's not a spell written down in a game. Maybe the character just has a field of energy. Or my elemental sorcerer is protected by a strange aura of earthen chunks of stone and wind or something, and you're just describing it differently. Maybe it's some kind of like a Super Saiyan effect where you're like glowing, or it's a Saint Seiya effect where you're surrounded by an illusory beast or something that is taking the hits other than yourself. Like, you can get very odd with that. A monk who's able to use their chakras or something, their chi, and they do actually suffer an arrow through the shoulder, but they just ignore the damage. Um, a Conan like barbarian with 50 hit points might be completely different than the bard with a similar amount of hit points. Um, Mateo says, in my games, characters have a pool of dice based on the same amount of hit dice they would have at their level, and they can add them to their rolls, while I use exhaustion as the real damage track. Now, I've heard house ruling. I've heard of people say, like, they don't like the yo-yo of hit points. Yo-yoing, and we'll get to Death Spiral. I did mention Death Spiral, so we'll come to that in a minute, because Mateo brings up a particular thing used in other games. But yo-yoing is waiting for characters to drop to 0 hit points to heal them, rather than healing them when they are not at 0 hit points, because it's less effective. And Some have used a house rule because yo-yoing just seems stupid. It's like, oh, you got dropped a hit, 0 hit points. You should be dying, and immediately within seconds they're back up. So a house rule is to apply a level of exhaustion to that character until they can get like a short rest or a long rest to wipe away a level of exhaustion. And I like that house rule. And in fifth edition, when you get 6 levels of exhaustion, you're dead. Period. And so exhaustion is more lethal than hit point loss. Some even say like if you suffer damage equal to or if you suffer damage above your constitution number, not only is it hit point loss, but you either have to like make a save or you suffer 1 level of exhaustion or something to make it feel a little bit lethal. You can do that as well, but that goes into death spirals, and I'll go to the death spiral. But let me get into the chat. By the way, guys, for those who don't know, the show is TriCast on YouTube, Twitch, and our own Discord server. So if you're someone who wants to share like an image or a link or something, of course you can't do that in our usual chat function. But if you join a Discord server and just come down to the boiler room where all the cool kids hang out, you can join that as well. And it, like I said, it's the audio gets punched out to the Discord server if you want to listen that way. So I'm live. So yeah. But anyway, getting back into the chat, Tina's Dungeon says you can also say hit point is more of a willpower, like how much pain and emotional trauma you can take before falling unconscious, which, considering the mental and emotional trauma, we've seen war movies where, there's the hyper close up of the person's face as they try to gather themselves, ducking behind cover when explosions are going around and they're covered in muck and gore. And then suddenly they come out of the pit of their own despair for the camera to pull back and see them run across the battlefield again. And could that be hit point loss? Sure, why not? I mean, I think the answer is yes, because they've told us to do that. I think the other problem is that we tend not to do that because we like to use some shorthand. And I think those of us who've played a lot of role-playing games for a very long time, I'm a man of a certain age, it is my fault for using shorthand for new players who think the shorthand is the rule, when the shorthand really isn't the rule. It's just a portion of that rule. Mateo says, yeah, a nice way of doing that is use hit points as a fictional currency, which, maybe, okay, this is a weird thing to say, but maybe loss of hit points can actually make you look cooler. So instead of looking at it as a failure, like, oh, my character's probably going to die, descriptively, maybe it makes you just look like a badass, right? Like, man, I really should have taken an arrow to the throat, but I didn't because it went through my hand instead, and I get to pull the arrow out of the palm of my hand or something. I mean, maybe we can describe it that way, or maybe the same character. It's like the movie 300 where Leonidas is fighting the big giant, and the battle axe comes over his head, and you see it slice off the little hairs off the top of his helmet. Maybe he suffered hit point damage at that point. Oh, sorry. Looking at the, I'm reading both chats. Sorry. Tina says, seen it in real life. Served 18 months in Iraq. Ooh, I would love to. No disrespect to what you've seen or been through, but as a person who hasn't, I would love to just have a discussion with you, even one-on-one, man, about those experiences and things. And I couldn't even imagine. Thank you very much for your service, by the way. And thanks for popping in. I hope my pronunciation of your of your name is not bad. Oh, I applied many of them in the campaigns. Damn. I'd love to be in those games, but damn. Oh man. Anyway, get back to the into the other chat. A shaman receiving assistance from a great spirit's shield. I like that, Cam. I'm feeling that. Yeah, a spirit comes down and helps you out. A warlock receives, or a paladin receives some kind of assistance from an otherworldly um, personage. You pronounce it wrong, but I was Army. I've been called worse. I figured that was a term to call somebody else to get somebody to say something. Okay, I will repronunciate the name. Mike Gould says hit points aren't just mortal wounds. An example in Die Hard. John McClane was battered, bruised, cut, exhausted by the end of the movie. Exactly. Using wound categories in place of hit points are still hit points. The category is just a larger chunk of hit points at once. Like Vampire has wound levels, yep. Wound level hit points, and Shadowrun damage track hit points. Omen says mutants and masterminds, and Ironclaw scrapped hit points altogether for conditions. And that's what Mike Gould is talking about. It's still hit points, but they have a condition track. So you are bruised, tired, injured, wounded. Like they use words, and then there's a numerical value of it. Mike Gould says, furthermore, arguing the reality of hit points in a game where we pretend to be wizards seems off. Right. And I think there's space for us to add in whatever the hell we want to. Right? Like if I'm playing a barbarian, of course I'm a badass and I'm taking 37 arrows to the chest because barbarian, right? Like Conan, right? Remember, whereas maybe my rogue never gets hit because they're just that quick, but they're just lucky. Maybe the guards that are surrounding my rogue, maybe I am dodging and weaving and jumping and parkouring away from it all, but my luck is running out, right? And yeah, sure, hit points aren't called luck, but well, technically they are. Maybe it is quite a bit of plot armor. I think the other thing about hit points is that we want to feel like there is a spiral of descent, right? Meaning like I used to be at 100%, but now that I'm at 83%, I'm not as strong, fast, quick. But we don't have that mechanism in the game. Whereas I look at hit points as, yes, you are spiraling downward, but your willpower is ramping up to meet the challenge of your descent. So while there's no mechanism measuring that, really, when you had 37 hit points, you're down to 3. The reason why you're at 100% is because you're a badass and you are just refusing to go down, even though you should be, if you are physically getting injured, you should be decreasing, which brings up the death spiral. Yeah, Tynes Dungeon says it's like Tynes Dungeon, like tines of a fork or a rake. Yeah, I could have pronounced it that way, but I sometimes put the incorrect emphasis on the improper syllable. So what is a death spiral? Now, a death spiral, and be careful of trying to add this into your games unless you yourself and your players are into this kind of thing. But a death spiral is, let's make up a number. Let's bring up the number 10. So character A or opponent A, adversary A, strikes character B, who also, they both have 10 damage, hit points, whatever. So character gets struck for 2 points and drops down to 8. So what happens with a death spiral is that when character drops down to 8, they are not 2 points below. They actually become, say, numerically 4 points below their adversary who's at 10. Why is it 4 points instead of 2? Well, the death spiral happens because when 8 drops down, when 10 drops down to 8, they are effectively, if numerically they are at a disadvantage, they are 2 points or 2 categories less able to strike and damage their opponent, and their opponent has 2 additional points of an ability to strike and damage the person who is injured. So death spirals basically mean not only am I less effective in both surviving, my opponent is more effective at killing me. So death spirals sometimes don't work numerically, or you have to do playtesting to balance them out, because death spirals compound on themselves. So 10 and 8, and now 8 can't strike 10 as well, and then maybe strikes 10 for 1 point, but then now they're at 9, 9 gets to strike 8 back, and then so now 8 goes down to 6, and so the death spiral continues because one or more factors are causing a player to become less effective. And players in death spiral games sometimes get very frustrated because, let's say you're using a dice pool, you're getting numerical subtractions. I was going to say disadvantage. I don't want to mix it up with advantage and disadvantage. And so players are like, oh man, I'm using percentiles and I get a minus 30%. I can't dodge. I can't stealth. I can't escape. My movement rate is reduced by 3 inches, and we're using miniatures. And so death spiraling can be, in some ways, hit points prevents death spiraling, or is a panacea against it. Um, okay, so going back up into the chat, Tired Neat Sleep says, how much terror would a blood-soaked barbarian covered in wounds that hasn't downed them give to an adversary? You know what? The narrative of that is probably pretty important, right? The hobgoblins that surrounded the barbarian, and the barbarian's got like javelins and arrows sticking out of his back and been hacked with an axe a couple of times and isn't down yet. And it's like, come on, come on. The hobgoblins are like, don't. I should have worn my brown pants, right? That's a possibility, and I like that. I like that a lot. Mike Gould says, and a rogue dodging and weaving forever will end in an exhausted and off-balance rogue. Pinned, primed for a kill shot. We've seen this over and over. Oh, hell yeah. We, I dare say the character who dodges and weaves is more often than not the main character, rather than the one who keeps taking hits over and over again. Like people who dodge from gunfire, the character who runs in the battle. The Battle of the Bastards. Game of Thrones, Battle of the Bastards. Maybe Jon Snow, the entire time he's in that fight, is taking damage. Dodging, weaving, arrow goes by, grabs an ally, hey, stand up. Instead of him getting hit, the minion, the nameless cannon fodder, gets an arrow through the back of the throat, drops him down. Horse falls over. He gets pinned into the ground and is trying to claw his way out. Maybe that entire battle, he's suffering hit after hit, It's possible. Michael says 5e exhaustion is an excellent example of a death spiral. The worse it gets, the harder it is to survive, and the harder it is for you to do what you need, and therefore more likely to go down the track. Right. Now, let me say that it makes it seem like death spirals are terrible. They're not. If you were playing in a game where death spiraling is a thing, especially on both sides of the table, right? If your character shoots an arrow through the thigh of an adversary, and that adversary can't run, move, hit back any stronger, maybe you are a badass for stepping over top of them and kicking them in the chest and pinning them down, because you know that they're at a -4 to hit you and -4 on their damage to hit you, and you're at a +4 to hit them. That's an easy death spiral to go into. Of course, the NPC is like, I give up, because they know your next hit is going to take them out, despite the fact that they still have hits left. You know what I mean? So Tynes D says, I have used a condition table to roll on for every 10% of health a player's lost, but also had a buff table I rolled on every 20% they lost, which if you've ever played the miniatures game through HeroClix, or Time's Dungeon mentions a buff table, meaning like you could do a death spiral that looks like a sine wave where someone decreases, but on their downward slide, they bump up through some other mechanism, right? They're able to call upon a certain reserve of speed or power or resisting injury or something, right? Like we've seen in real life people walk into emergency rooms literally pierced through the brain with solid objects. We've known of people who have had limbs cut off, fingers, toes, hands, um, bones sticking out of their body, and they're just like, could someone help me out here? Whereas we've seen people get minor cuts, they see their own blood and they pass out. So you could do a hit points are exhaustion, but something else is the physical. Two things might be playing at the same time, where is there a physical result of getting injured, or is this more of an emotional injury, meaning like both a person gets a minor injury and goes like, I got a little paper cut, pass out, or have themselves ripped open, or grabbing their organs and they're holding them together like, could somebody get me a stapler? You know what I mean? Tynes D says some people seeing people move vehicles when life depends on it. If not to make fun of that, but in the television show The Incredible Hulk with Bill Bixby, he talks about there's a scene where like a mom through the haze of like heat wave haze off of a car wreck or something literally lifts a car off of her child. And yeah, people are more amazing than we give them credit for, and they do some fucking amazing things when push comes to shove. So yeah, times D, yeah, we've seen that. Why wouldn't a person be able to do that? Like, why wouldn't a wizard who feels like they're beaten and battered and bruised just rise up from their fear to, summon their internal energies to summon some power and blast their enemies back? I think narratively we can make something special about it. Cam's like, hero clicks are fun, but man, does it hurt the fingers. They sure do. I brought up hero clicks because in side note, they are plastic miniatures, and on the bottom they have a base that clicks. You turn it, and as you turn the base, the character, some of the characters will decline pretty normally, like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Some of the hero clicks, when they start to suffer damage, they will actually spike up. They'll sine wave. They will go down, up, and certain abilities will become available to them when they suffer harm, rather than being available when they are instead of going nova, as kind of referred to in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, to give you a summary of a ton of other hero point systems, we talked about wound tracks. Tynes D talked about like percentage of health. We've seen wound tracks are basically like hit points given a literary reference: wounded, tired, injured, confused, disabled, something like that. But there are other mechanisms, like, for example, if you have dice pool games, you have a pool of 10 dice, and maybe you grab your dice pool based on your character capabilities. I've got a 3 strength and 2 swords. I pick up 5 dice to roll them, and as you suffer damage, you might lose dice out of your dice pool. So if you've only got 7 dice left, you may still use 3 for your strength and 2 for your sword skill, but maybe your dodge skill or something, maybe there's something higher than the 7 dice you have, and you can't roll more than 7 dice because you only have so many dice left. So there are some dice pool games where as you suffer damage, you remove dice. In someone correct me, in Savage Worlds, they use a classic die step up, step down system. So a D6 is less than a D8, which is less than a D10. And when you suffer harm, instead of hit points, you roll a die lower on the classic die category. So you go from D12 to D10 to D8 and such. And so when there a chance that if I roll my D6 against your D10 that I'll win? There's a chance, but the percentage chances are lower. Um, what are some other systems? Oh, there are some systems do wound tracking only across one side of the table. So, for example, I believe this is in the Genesis Cipher system where the dungeon master does not track any hits for their adversaries. What happens is it's all on the player's side. So, a player, the adversaries may always do 5 damage and have a defense of 5. And the players track moves up and down above 5 up to 10 or 15, down below 5 down to 3 or 2. And a character with, say, a 15 defense isn't injured by the damage of 5 that happens at them, but the player characters modify their character using is essentially spending their plot armor to defend themselves against the enemy, who always does the same thing all the time, right? So sometimes the wound tracks are on one side of the table, which seems kind of strange, but ooh, whoa, there it goes. Ooh, sorry, my screen just went dead. Wayne Wayne Brock, I'm going to pronounce it, says a hit in D&D doesn't mean actual physical damage in all or most cases. Hit points represents luck, ability to minimize damage by dodge, partial blocking, stamina, etc. Only your last handful of hit points are damage. Yeah, and we mentioned that earlier. I know you came in a little bit late, and thank you for joining me here. But yeah, hit points don't need to be something that is arrow gets shot at you. Oh, of course I take a arrow to the chest. It doesn't need to be that way. It can be very plot armory in many ways. Tynes D says, I've used every system and tried to create my own many times over my 30 years of DMing all different tabletop RPGs. Yeah, I'm an old grognard, dude. I've been playing since the 80s Redbox era. And yeah, we've used a ton of systems. One system we used in specifically Dungeons and Dragons was when you got hit, you grabbed a die. So and you went through the classic 6. So when you got hit, you had to roll a d4 and subtract it from everything you did. And then when you got hit again, and when I say got hit, it didn't matter how much damage it was. If you got hit for 3 points or 45, you had another die, and like a Bane die or something. So you went from D4 to D6, D6 to D8, D8 to D10 would be subtracted from the things that you did. And we did that for a while, but again, it did feel like a death spiraling kind of thing, but it was enjoyable for the enemy. So, and then there's other stuff we can do with hit points. I'm going to mention this in a minute, but getting back into the chat as well. Mike Gould says, I had a bad motorcycle accident in 2013 that nearly amputated my left ankle. I was conscious the entire time. Adrenaline equals a lot of hit points. You know what? Adrenaline accounts for a lot more than we give it credit for. It's like our own internal drug high, designed on purpose. Yeah, there's a reason why we have adrenaline, because we're pretty fragile when it comes to nature. So when you gotta just haul ass away from some kind of predator, hell yeah, I need some hit points. Oh man. Ag R says, I want to know how to pronounce your avatar name. But anyway, Ag R says, if hit points means luck or ability to avoid damage, what is being healed then? I don't understand. And Michael's answer, I'm going to read Michael's answer because I have one in my head automatically. Healing then means returning divine favor, giving respite, granting a rest, and repairing strain damage. Healing doesn't necessarily mean healing a wound. It could be, now remember, we're talking narrative here, right? How many times in a movie have we seen an ally come up to our main character and go, get up, soldier, you've got this, or someone, main character gets beamed in the head, you hear the the sound dies out and you hear that high pitched in the ear, and then someone comes by, grabs them up by the arm, and wipes the dust off their face and is like, get back into the fight. I mean, healing doesn't need to be eyes glowing, hands glowing, wound stitches together, which it could. Healing could be Wolverine like my barbarians hit points look like I'm healing from my damage, right? Like what I'm saying is we could add on flavor that is in between the gaps, like jazz music. It's music beats in between what's going on. So when my badass barbarian who has 60 hit points takes 10 points of damage, maybe I'm getting hit by an arrow that pierces me. I narratively rip the arrow out of my shoulder and my shoulder heals from the wound. So I've got a little wound, but I'm not really bleeding or anything. That's a possibility. I brought up the monk centering themselves. It could be luck. Could A rogue who doesn't get hit because their hit point plot armor is being decreased and someone comes up to heal them is like, oh, maybe they feel like they're exhausted, but their ally comes up to bless them, like, no, the gods are on your side, join back in the fight. And then that's what happens. So I think it's just a matter of us recontextualizing what the hell's going on rather than looking at hit points as, oh, I got hit, I lost a point. Healing is only knitting physical damage. Because remember, as per the description, sorry, I looked at the chat in the Discord chat. I've had worse. It's only a flesh wound. But as described by 5th edition, hit points are emotional damage. It is luck. It is slightly avoiding what's going on. Like, so maybe healing is also the same way. So it's just up to us to recontextualize what's going on, not the rules saying that they're incorrect, if that makes sense, right? It's very easy for us to go, my cleric heals my ally. Okay, that means your eyes are glowing and white light goes around the wound and the wound stops bleeding. But maybe, like, is it healing word where the cleric doesn't get close to the person? Maybe it's just maybe the cleric or the bard or something, or the druid rallies the troops, right? You're not down, you can get back up. We need you in the fight, or the gods shine themselves upon you. Just trust in them. Or maybe like Conan the Barbarian in the movie, who gets struck down and says, and Crom, bless me, but if not, to hell with you. And when he falls down, and he's about to get killed, what does Conan do? He looks up and he sees a woman blinding in white light, says, do you want to live forever? And he stands up and fights. Now, does Conan have magic? Probably not. But could a character be saved by an ancestor who just comes there and speaks in their ear, a la Obi-Wan Kenobi speaking in Luke's ear after Obi-Wan is killed? Maybe. I don't know. Why not? I don't know. I think if we creatively allow our players to come up with how these things are happening, and mind you, these are only words. These are descriptors that do not affect anything numerical in the game. I'm down with it. Times Dungeon says healing word is a verbal defibrillation. Get up, everybody! You see a bunch of PCs on the ground. Wait. Hey, that what is it? The Tempest cleric defibrillating everybody. Everybody, step back. I love it. I love that so much. Oh man, healing could be smacking someone in the face and telling them to get back in the fight. Hell yeah. Hell's yes. Why not? Why the hell not? Yeah, like, yeah, you know what? Get up, get up. I don't know. Get back up, you mother. Okay, all right, I get it. You know why? Why not? Why? Of course, that can be the thing. You know, I mean, yeah. Mike Gould says, or they wrap a bandage around a bullet wound and the hero carries on. Excuse me, how many times have we seen that? The hero hurt, pierced, should be bleeding out. Oh no, my leg is injured. I can't fight. My hand got pierced by an arrow. I can't fight. And what do? Snap, pull, wrap, back in a fight. Right? Cameron says being Boromir comes with a lot of hit points, especially when he's animated. Valeria, that was Valeria returning as a Valkyrie in the Conan movie. Was that her name? Because I couldn't remember. God, I couldn't remember. But yes, she was in the very beginning of the movie and then comes back. But I make the argument that maybe that's just him getting healed, or it maybe that's just a, you know what, you're down to 7 hit points now, Conan, and I know you had 83. You better get the hell back up. Or maybe that's just a character just describing playing between the musical beats, right? Like at my gaming table, we used to play between the musical beats, and when I say the musical beats, the between the die rolls, shit would happen that we would talk about, and then we would make the die roll where the thing really happens, and then between that we'd like play around a little bit, like instead of my character hits it with the sword, it was, you know what, I dodge and swing, parrying the attack, and then bing bing, you know, our swords clash, and then I hook my foot against his ankle, trying to trip the hobgoblin down, but he falls and spins and gets back up again, and then right when he gets back up, I die roll, boom, stab him in the throat, right? It was playing between the beats. And I think there's space for us to do that, just to make things cool and not to make people feel like dumbasses, you know? Yeah, Cameron says she also blinds the D-bag he is fighting. That's right in that scene, doesn't she? Is it her that swings at the guy who gets blinded across the face or something? Or I can't remember the scene. I know I vaguely remember the scene because it's been years. Damn, it might be 10 years or more since I've revisited it. Valeria blocked Rexor's sword blow, so it wasn't just a hallucination. Ooh, that's right, because Conan gets pushed back on the ground. She appears, blocks the sword, puts her hand down to him, and is like, "Do you want to live forever?" And does she help him up, or does he just get back up and slice Rexor across the throat? I can't remember, but oh my god. Ag R's like, yes, Valeria returns as a Valkyrie. Glorious movie. Glorious movie. Yep. So Vampanoid says, I've heard hit points count as like heroic points before. Like in an action movie, to do stunts, you need hero points. Once your character runs out, they can't do cool stuff until they get more. Yes, absolutely. Using I think the idea of like the heroism until you drop down to 0 is a thing, right? Like our characters are heroic. And yes, exactly what you're saying, Vampanoy. Like maybe our characters are the heroes. They are badasses. The minute they run out of being a badass, when they drop to 0, that's the time when they are surrounded by the villains and they can't do anything, you know, where they finally put their hands up because someone's got them in the crosshairs. Or it's literally the time where the heroes are like punch, kick, slice, boom, and then somebody comes behind their head, boom, knocks them in the back of the head, and everything goes black. It's the moment where the hero is being a badass, but a net gets thrown over them, or shackles get put on them, or they are struck in a manner in which, you know, finally you're able to beat through their defenses or something like that. Tesla puts into the Discord the actual video of that last scene. I would love to put it up in the live chat, but I'll get dinged by YouTube easily. Mike says he just gets up and and cashes Rexor's check. Cashes Rexor's check. Oh, let me see that. Yeah, I got you. Now, the last thing I will say about hit points is applying. Now, this is done in the ICRPG, the index card RPG, and we've seen this in other places where applying armor class sometimes and or hit points to problem solving is an option for you guys to use. Meaning, like, we need to lift up the portcullis, or we need to break through the door. We know physical objects have hit points in armor class, but a problem can be solved as well, like lifting, pushing, moving, disabling traps or something like that. Now, I understand that in Dungeons and Dragons, we don't have damage to ephemeral objects, meaning like we don't have a damage track for social encounters. Like I want to convince the king to loan us his magic sword or something, right? The king doesn't have 37 social points that you can start to speak ramp down to do a thing. We don't have hit points for not locked doors, but the lock on a door for a thief to, or rogue to, I want to pick the lock. Okay, well, it's got 17 hit points. Great, I do roll 6 hit points, subtract 6 hit points from the lock, and now it's got 11 left or something, right? We don't really have that in Dungeons and Dragons. Could you include that? I suppose. You might want to, I suppose you could use hit dice as a track for that, although you might want to do the inverse, like barbarians use a D4 while wizards use a D12 to problem solve. That's a possibility. Or you could just do skill checks as measured as total number of successes versus failures. Like, you need 3 successes. If you get 3 failures, you can't do the thing, but you need 3 successes to pick the lock. So 1, 2, 3 sleight of hand rolls, boom, I open it, but you're counting down, which is kind of a hit point track, right? Success versus failure. So I want to lift up the portcullis. All right, it's going to take 3 strength checks, or it's going to take a total maximum of 45 strength total to lift up the portcullis. Well, I've got a 20 strength. I need 25 more strength. Who else in the group is going to help me lift up the gate to the portcullis, right? And then 3 other player characters like, I'll run over and help you out. Or the wizard, the bard, the cleric are going to help me lift it up, or something like that. Like, maybe that's not necessarily hit points. Success tracking is a possibility. So you could, like, if you get a critical on a success, like a strength check, that counts as 2 of your 3 successes, whereas a crit fail might count as 2 failures, much like a death save. What else? There's some other mechanisms you can use as well, like we were talking about, like dice pools, and here, like Vampanoy is mentioning, like hero points and things of that nature. Yeah, for me, I don't have a problem with hit points, and I do understand that the terminology, the context of it, it's kind of bad, but actually in the rules, hit points aren't just physical damage. And for the most part, you guys are all like, yeah, I agree with you. Let's see. So Mike Cool says, would you consider the first attack a crit, or was it just max damage when Conan put that sword through the snake's face? I don't know. Subatoy was a thief and archer, so he's doing sneak attack and 100 damage with each shot. That's a lot of damage. Add 1 crit from Conan, and that's 1 giant snake XP. Cash out. Oh, you guys are hilarious. But you know what? As a side note, I do that shit too. It's like sometimes you watch TV or a movie, and especially something you've seen before, so it doesn't really take you out of it because you've seen it before, and you go, I wonder what that would be in my favorite game. Like, you're like, is Conan like a seventh level fighter and a third level thief or something? Because I believe in the books, Conan is never actually a barbarian. He's actually other character classes, right? And if you're like, I don't know, and you're like, I wonder how much that monster is the Balrog a pit fiend or is it a Baylor? Do that stuff all the time. Do it all the time. Tynes D says, I do it with strength in others. Like a wall had collapsed on a child and party had to have a total of 85 strength to lift it off. Yeah, I love that stuff because that those of you who are new don't know that I speak about this all the time about the magic triangle. And the triangle is PCs, adversaries, protagonists, antagonists, and this third, you got to have that third thing that occupies what the hell's going on. So wall collapses on child, party needs to lift wall off a child. They're also being attacked by enemies. What do? Hard decision. Do you not lift the wall off the child, or do you try to lift the wall off the child while somebody's trying to attack you from behind, and that kind of thing, right? Took whole party a couple of their pet and random NPCs from town. I love that. Their pet. Wolf and small frog trying to lift the wall off of somebody. I love that. I love that image. Wayne Brock says hit point is a purposefully abstract system, so you don't get taken out by an arrow to the thigh before you actually engage the enemy. I think some people have had problems with the fact that a dagger across the throat of a character with 37 hit points means that they could never have their throat cut, even with a crit. So what does that look like when a player, what does it look like narratively when a player knows that they can't have their throat sliced, yet a person has come up to them and definitely has them in their crosshairs and could very easily cut their throat? What does that look like? Now, narratively, you could make the case that the fighter with 37 hit points with a knife or dagger against their throat has been in this position before and knows that they could take this person out, right? Like, oh, I know I'm only going to take 1 to 4 points of damage because I'm a badass and I've been in this position before. I'm going to elbow him in the gut while my other hand sneaks up and does a wrist twist or something. Like, that could be the thing. But I think the other reason why it feels like it takes them out of it is that a dungeon master might want to put a player in a precarious position, and hit points keep the dungeon master from allowing them to put them in the precarious position in the first place. Their pet is a common mimic, stuck in the form of a tavern table. Yeah, we haven't brought up mimics a lot before, but we used to have a little pet mimic that used to hang around us talking and stuff like that. Oh man. Oh man. Mm-mm-mm. The model for second edition Barbarians, I'm an old school player. First edition, I own the Deities and Demigods with 144 pages. Ooh, you own the original with the Malabonian and Cthulhuoid demigods in it. Wow, that's a classic one. Yep, Mike Gould says Rage is a modern addition. The barbarians used to be anti-magic. If for those of you youngins out there, they used to be anti-magic characters, not rage-inducing characters and whatnot. But I've gone on a little bit too long with this, guys. I do have to get out of here. I'm a gentleman of a certain age. I have to give you guys a little bit too much information. I've got to get myself a physical. I'm literally going to get a prostate exam amongst other things out there. So yeah, I got to get out of here. But guys, thank you very much for joining me. All of you who are new to the channel, Tynes D and Wayne and the rest of you guys, thank you very much for being here. I'm DBJ. This is RPG with DBJ. I'm a content creator. I check the doobly-doo down below. I write for Critical Hit Publishing. I am currently one of many other far more brilliant people than myself, helping to write for a huge going to be a huge Kickstarter from N World called Level Up 5e. It's going to be Advanced 5th Edition. Please check that out. I'll bring up more and more information as I go along. But anyway, guys, have a great day. Thanks for my time. No, thank you for you guys just being here. Dude, it's like, look, listen, this whole channel is just about like before, after the game. You know how you just sit down and you're like having some fun. You're just talking things out. Yeah, that's us. And so it's not just us, that's you. So, oh, I'm not new, just the name. I did not know that. Well, listen, new to me. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for being here. All of you for being here. And even if you change your names or your avatars and all that kind of stuff, I love it anyway. So guys, all of you out there, have a great one. I'm going to say goodbye. Everybody have a great one. I'll see you out there. But the last thing is, just thank you, because I really don't. It's not that I don't have to do this, but I could be speaking to dead air, and I'm glad that you guys are positive and energetic and brilliant and creative and things like that. And if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't get my morning coffee, morning RPG coffee. So I really appreciate it. So guys, have a great one. I'll see you later. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.